This is my first post, and although this happened in December of 2019, I still think about it on a daily basis because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I hope it offers some sort of insight into what to do and what not to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. Back in early December, I had ventured out to do some late night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old, stay-at-home mother of 2 young children. So once my husband gets home from work, I like to take some time to myself and go shopping, take a drive, or run errands. Kid-free. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I arrived at the Target I frequent. I am by no means a paranoid or anxious person, but I have attended several seminars in college on human trafficking and have done plenty of my own research, learning to identify red flags and what precautions to take when out in the public alone, especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times just in case. I parked directly in front of the store, next to a cart caddy, and took a mental note of the vehicles nearby. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I began browsing as usual, following the main aisle around. I had been browsing for only 10 or 15 minutes when I noticed a young man, mid-20s maybe, tall and skinny, dressed in a dirty gray 2-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. He looked over at me. I smiled and said hello, but his facial expression was completely blank. He looked like he might have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he did not seem to care for my gesture, and he quickly moved on. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except I took notice that he was just wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, hands in his pockets, not seeming to be with anyone. I continued shopping with no second thoughts and made my way to the next department. Several minutes had passed, and that is when I noticed a young man wearing the same gray sweatsuit and similar work boots. Again, no cart, no basket. He too glanced at me and then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I became a bit more alert but remained composed and continued browsing. Another 15 minutes or so passed, and that is when the third, older man caught my attention. Same gray sweatsuit, same work boots. No cart, no basket, just hands in his pockets. I assumed they might be in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers, but why were they not walking around together? And why did none of them have anything to purchase? At this point, it was difficult to focus on shopping. I had a bad feeling about these 3 men, and it became clear that something was off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if I was being monitored by all 3 of them, as if they were communicating my whereabouts as I continued to make my way through the store. Because each department I entered, it did not take long before one of the 3 would pass by, whatever side aisle I happened to be in, making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or let my suspicions overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions and prove to myself that my gut feeling was valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. With every aisle I popped into, just a few minutes later, one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed. It felt as if I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. They were no longer trying to be inconspicuous, which was the scariest part of all, and everything instinctually was screaming at me to get out of there. I gripped my cart tightly and figured if they got too close, I could use it to push them away or at least create distance between us. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour and was ready to check out. Honestly, I felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing even if I wanted to. The store was pretty empty around this time, which made the situation even more unsettling. 2 preteen girls were wandering around by themselves, and the men had made similar advances towards them, but the girls were seemingly oblivious. I quietly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and to stay with them, trying not to scare them. The mother in me was on full protection mode. I could not imagine having my young children with me that night. Thank God they were home safe. As I made my way to checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me. walking at a quicker pace. I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached. I'll never forget the darkness in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, continuing to stare me down while walking backwards to hold his sinister gaze as he exited the store. I had lost sight of the other two men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He had made his message clear in that very moment. My stomach dropped and my entire body began to shake. It was a feeling I had not felt since I was a kid getting lost in a supermarket. A feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout, discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and told them what had transpired over the last hour. I politely asked for a male employee to walk me to my car and for them to alert their security. When I described the men to the manager, her face sank, as if she had already known. She confirmed she knew exactly who I was talking about. She said several of her female employees had found these men unsettling in the past. She reassured me that someone would escort me out, made a report, and said she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking but felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young women in the store. A male employee walked me out. What I saw as I exited that store made me sick to my stomach, solidifying everything I had suspected. A white, windowless van was parked in the lot directly behind my car, about 3 parking spaces back. One of the men was in the driver's seat, and the other 2 were leaning against the side of the van, facing my car, attempting to stay out of view. I pointed them out to the employee and said, "There they are," which then prompted the men to scurry into the van and speed out of the parking lot without hesitation. I truly do not know what would have happened if I had walked out to the car alone, and I am so grateful I made it home safe and got to tell this story. Over the following week, I heard there were several abduction attempts in that shopping center across from that Target, and I am certain it was the same individuals to the 3 matching sweatsuit creeps. Let us never meet again. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters, one Saturday night in a very safe city with a very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late as the mall stores were starting to close. So I took my kids to the connected restaurant for a late dinner. We finished eating at about 10 p.m. and left out the Applebee's entrance into a practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys, when a 50-something-year-old crusty-looking man started walking up from somewhere in the parking lot. He had shaggy gray hair and white beard, a faded flannel shirt, and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him and shakenly said, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came up and stood right next to me and my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock it and let them in. He then started making small talk with me and the girls, asking things like whether they were being good girls for Santa, how old they were, whether we had all of our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things we had picked up. He did not seem drunk, high, or mentally impaired in any way. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 p.m., being approached by a stranger who had come and stood right next to me and my kids on the other side of the car, just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my girls with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I did not want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing while trying to look as calm and nonchalant at the same time, disguising my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking and trying to keep the situation from escalating by staying calm and talking to him, while also trying in vain to find my keys. They were in there, hiding well. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or a gun, and my kids were right next to him, away from me on the other side of the car, and I could not find my keys to get them into safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation. I could see my 15-year-old was a little weirded out and kept glancing at me to gauge my reaction to the situation. Kids often do not recognize potential danger when they are with their parents since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were oblivious to the situation we were all in. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious. She started talking about what she had picked out for Daddy for Christmas and asked him if he knew what Minecraft was, cheerfully keeping this man engaged in conversation without realizing that I was becoming desperate to get them out of there. Then I felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized I might have lost my keys inside the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this man who kept looking over his shoulder and was showing no signs of walking away. I was thinking he was waiting for the perfect moment. All he would need to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted, as long as he would not hurt them. That would force me to get into the car with them and drive wherever he wanted. And being that he was not wearing a mask, suggested his intentions included leaving no witnesses. Then all of a sudden he said, "All right, it was nice talking to you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction from which he had come. It was not until that moment that I found my car keys. I unlocked the car, told my kids to get in fast, and locked the door and drove out of there. My 15-year-old laughed and said, "Okay, that was weird." I was overwhelmed with relief and confused about what had just happened. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked how the shopping went. My 15-year-old told him what happened, kind of joking about it. I started joking too, telling my husband how I had been mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, making fun of how I had been rummaging through my purse for my keys. My husband went completely white. His father is a retired sheriff's deputy, and my husband himself went through the police academy training after high school, before deciding to go to business school instead. The knowledge he gained from that background, combined with growing up with a cop for a father, told him exactly what he was looking at when I described the details. What he told me rattled me to the bone. He said that he was 100% certain that the reason the man was hanging around and chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock the car. And the reason he was standing next to my kids was because once I unlocked it and the kids started to get in, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with me and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage over me, forcing me to get in and drive to wherever he wanted. He was positioned by the backseat passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing. My husband then told me that the most likely reason that the man eventually left was because it took me so long to find my keys. The longer it took, the more anxious and spooked I made him. That whole time I was desperate to find my car keys, though through some sort of divine intervention, they stayed hidden in my purse, and that is what saved us. This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often and it has changed the way I operate throughout my life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. For the story's sake, I will tell you that I was 25 and an attractive, slender blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with a bar manager and he noticed we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends we would need to get through the weekend. I picked up everything without trouble until I got to the liquor aisle. There were 2 rough-looking guys in the aisle, probably around my age, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed quickly and power-walked myself to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there. When you are a bartender, you are kind of always on stage and required to be charming, and you learn to identify the types of people you otherwise absolutely would not tolerate if you were not being paid to interact with them. I got to the self-checkout, and the 2 guys were right behind me, using the station next to mine. I got a better look at them now that they were close. One was taller, muscular, and average-looking. The other was shorter and more heavy-set. They both looked dirty, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. I was not sure if they were high or had already been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me, and our eyes met awkwardly. So I did the polite Midwestern thing and flashed them a quick half-hearted smile. The taller one started trying to talk to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied with something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me though." They moved closer to me, ignoring the responsibilities to scan their items. "Oh, must be for your boyfriend then, huh?" I flashed the awkward tight-lipped smile again and rolled my eyes slightly. "This is your hint that I am not interested, guys." The taller one continued. "You could come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean." I replied, "No thanks. I'm good. I have plans already." The tall one started to get upset that his approach was not working and moved very close to me, like 2 inches away. I ignored him and stayed focused on the scanner. He smelled like he had not showered in several days. He got louder and said, "I see how it is. You probably only sleep with doctors and rich men, huh? You think you're too good for us? We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson." I was not sure exactly what he meant by that, but it definitely was not good. Still not looking at him, I turned my body so it was blocking the view of my purse, which I set on the scanner and reached in to grab my 4-inch pocket knife and slid it up my jacket sleeve in case I needed to protect myself. I did this in view of the self-checkout worker standing at her podium and looked at her with wide eyes, trying to communicate that I did not feel safe and might need help. I turned back to the machine and slid my credit card to pay. The machine malfunctioned and started beeping. The worker came over immediately. The moment she arrived, the 2 guys completely changed their demeanor, from barely concealed menace to, "Oh, we are just friendly good old boys making polite conversation." They actually tried to act like I knew them and we were friends so the worker would not be alerted. They even joked that I was stealing something and that was why the machine had gone off. The worker was not buying it for a second. She was a 6-foot-plus woman with muscle on her. I would not mess with her on my best day. She pressed a few buttons on the screen, shot the guys a very unimpressed look while they were trying to act charming, and canceled the order completely. She turned to me and said, "I am sorry, ma'am. This machine seems not to be working correctly. Why don't you gather your things and I will ring you up at the actual register." She put her hand on my back and gave me the same wide-eyed look I had given her, letting me know she understood I was in danger. She led me to the register near the security office. The guys lingering around the self-checkout, still glaring at me, and eventually completed their purchase. Then they stood at the exit, waiting for me. I felt like walking out that door alone in that moment would have been walking to my death. The worker kept a close eye on them while scanning my items. As she scanned, she told me there really had not been anything wrong with that machine. It had just misread my credit card. Then she said, "I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang security to be ready to walk you out to the parking lot when you are ready to leave. Then I saw you take that knife out and put it in your sleeve to protect yourself. Good girl. As much as I'd like you to show them they picked the wrong woman to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you were safe. I can see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on this screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave." I thought, this woman deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over and told her what they had said to me and how afraid I was getting. As I was talking to her, my bar manager called to see what was taking so long. I explained what was happening and he was very concerned and ready to come up there himself. By the time I hung up, the guys had given up and walked out into the parking lot. The worker told me to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling they might still be out there waiting to see which vehicle was mine. My immediate thought was, no way, they had to be gone by now. I was wrong. The worker and the security guard escorted me out. As it was past midnight, you can imagine how empty the parking lot was. Towards the back of the lot sat an old big pickup truck running with lights on, pointed towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it would not have made sense for them to park that way initially, so I assumed they had moved the truck to have a full view of the exit so they would know which car was mine when I walked out. But when I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were all walking directly at them, and that I was not getting into it until we watched them leave, They peeled out of the parking lot. They did a full burnout. 4 creeps did not get their way. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again. I am certain they saved my life that night, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those men had been planning. I did write a long letter to the store manager and their corporate offices describing how their employees had protected me and how grateful I was. I really hope that earned her a promotion, a bonus, or at the very least a raise. She did not know me at all and was ready to protect me anyway, which is not even close to her job description. She did it regardless. Needless to say, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore, and never will again. Guys, sometimes these stories, they feel so real and you don't really realize what other people go through, you know? This batch was one of those. So, anyways, thanks so much for being here. And if you have any stories that you'd like to share, shoot them over to my email, link in the description, or just drop it in the comments. Let me know what happened. That way I can tell your story and make sure everyone else hears it when they need to hear something like this. Alright guys, peace.